Racist cop assaults a black woman, then learns she's his boss. The twist that rocked the entire police department. Smack! The sharp, echoing sound of the slap shattered the peaceful morning air. Alyssa Monroe staggered back, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Her cheek burned fiercely, the stings spreading in sharp tendrils, but she refused to show an ounce of weakness. Not here, not in front of them. The gathered crowd froze, eyes wide and phones raised high, capturing every brutal second. Officer Jake Matthews stood towering over her, his face flushed with rage, his hand still tingling from the force of the slap. For a beat, he hesitated, just long enough to realize he'd lost control, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "Who the hell do you think you are, talking back to me?" he growled, seizing Alyssa's wrist and yanking it roughly before snapping cold steel cuffs around her wrists with brutal efficiency. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Hey, that's police brutality," someone shouted. Another voice joined in. "We got the whole thing on camera." But Jake shoved Alyssa toward the patrol car, undeterred. Alyssa didn't fight back. She didn't plead. She didn't even flinch as the cuffs bit into her skin. Instead, she fixed her sharp gaze directly on him, calm and unblinking. "You just ended your entire career, Officer Matthews," she said, her voice cold but eerily steady. Jake faltered for a split second. Then he scoffed. "Yeah, right," he sneered. "You think some bystander footage is going to scare me? I'm following protocol." What he didn't know was that the truth was about to explode in his face. Inside the cramped back seat of the patrol car, Alyssa sat in silence, her wrists aching beneath the tight cuffs. She leaned back, her eyes tracing the flickering glow of the streetlights dancing against the window. No panique, no fear, not even anger, just patience. She'd been here before. Not this exact situation, but the feeling was all too familiar. Outside, the crowd had grown louder. "Let her go," someone screamed. "This is police brutality." The distant wail of sirens hinted at backup closing in, but Alyssa knew they weren't needed. Not for her. The real chaos? It was only just beginning. Her mind drifted back, pulled into the whirlpool of memories she had long buried. 20 years earlier. The summer heat in Brookdale was suffocating. The cracked asphalt of streets radiated waves of warmth as kids played basketball on a rusted hoop that barely clung to its post. 10-year-old Alyssa Monroe was one of them. Her laugh echoed across the block, untainted by life's cruel realities. Until it all changed. "Get your hand where I can see them." The voice cut through the afternoon haze. Alyssa turned toward the commotion. Down the street, a group of officers crowded around a small house, her house. And standing in the doorway, his hands raised in calm defiance, was her father. "Dad," she whispered, already inching toward him. Samuel Monroe stood tall, refusing to back down even as the officers barked orders. "I didn't do anything," he said, his voice steady. "I was just checking on the neighborhood." But the cops weren't listening. One officer stepped forward, grabbing Samuel's arm and wrenching it behind his back with brutal force. Alyssa's legs moved before her mind did. "Daddy!" she screamed, running forward. But her mother's hands caught her shoulders, yanking her back. "No, Elise, stay here. Let him go. He didn't do anything." The officer didn't flinch. Her father dropped to his knees as the cold bite of handcuffs snapped shut. Alyssa broke free of her mother's grip, charging toward the nearest officer, her tiny fists pounding against his leg. He barely acknowledged her before shoving her aside. She hit the pavement hard, the rough concrete tearing into her knees. Blood smeared across her skin, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were locked on her father, now being shoved into the back of a police car. He turned his head, their eyes meeting, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. A promise, a warning. A fire was lit inside Alyssa Monroe that would never burn out. Back to the present. The blaring siren pulled her from the memory, its shriek cutting into the heavy silence of the patrol car. But Alyssa didn't flinch. She knew exactly how this would end. Not for her. For him. The patrol car rolled into the Silvercrest police precinct, its tires crunching over gravel as it pulled into the lot. Jake Matthews yanked open the door, roughly dragging Alyssa out. "Move!" he barked, pushing her forward. But Alyssa didn't resist. She walked with calm, measured steps, as though she belonged here, more than he did. Other officers in the precinct looked up as they passed. Some froze. Others exchanged sharp, wide-eyed glances. Jake barely noticed. He was too focused on Alyssa, on the growing knot of frustration and confusion twisting in his gut. They reached the booking area. Jake shoved Alyssa toward the holding cell. But before he could open the door, "Stop right there." The voice was sharp, commanding. The entire precinct seemed to freeze. Captain Laura Bennett stood at the far end of the room, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Jake turned, trying to mask the unease that crawled up his spine. "Captain, let her go." Jake hesitated, the weight of the room crushing down on him. "She assaulted me, resisted orders. I was following." Captain Bennett's eyes narrowed. "You assaulted her," she corrected, holding up a tablet. On the screen was the video. The slap, the cuffs, the crowd, the witnesses, the damning footage, already spreading like wildfire online. Jake's throat went dry. This is out of context. "It's everywhere, Officer Matthews," the captain snapped. "And if you'd done even a cursory background check, you'd know exactly who you just slapped in the middle of the street." The room fell deathly silent. Alyssa smiled for the first time. "Chief Investigator Alyssa Monroe," she announced smoothly, turning to face the stunned crowd. "The head of the Federal Bureau of Justice Ethics." Jake staggered backward, as if physically struck. "You're my boss?" "Not just yours," Alyssa said, her tone razor-sharp. "I oversee every officer in this precinct." She held up her cuffed hands. "Take these off." No one moved. "Now." A trembling rookie officer stepped forward, fumbling with the keys. With a soft click, the cuffs fell away. Alyssa rubbed her wrists before locking eyes with Jake one last time. "You're done." The fallout was instant. The video spread like wildfire, plastered across every news outlet and social media feed. Hashtag Justice for Alyssa trended globally within hours. Protests erupted outside the precinct, fueled by years of pent-up rage against systemic abuse and racial bias. Jake Matthews was stripped of his badge, fired, and publicly disgraced. His name was dragged through every media outlet, painted as the face of everything broken within law enforcement. But Alyssa wasn't done. This wasn't about just Jake. This was about the system that had allowed him, and countless others, to thrive unchecked for so long. Her fight was only beginning, and this time the world was watching.